coming to you direct from the nerve center of the galaxy's greatest comic. This is the 2000 AD Thrillcast.
Borak Thang athletes, and welcome to the 2000 AD Thrillcast. I am your host, Molchar. Now, you're probably listening to this on some kind of mobile device, in which case I suggest you head along to whichever app store you can use and download Judge Dredd Crime Files, which is the brand new game from No Yetis Allowed, licensed from Rebellion. It's a card game based on everyone's favourite lawman, which you can play right now. It's free to play. And on this episode of the Thrillcast, we have Mark Hardisty from No Yetis Allowed, who's going to tell us all about the game and its development. I've seen a lot of people sinking a lot of hours into it already, even though it's only just come out. So, Mark's got some real insights into working with 2000 AD creators to create something that will appeal to fandom, but also hopefully will appeal to those who just want a good game to play on their phones. Before we move on to talking to Mark, a couple of housekeeping things. Check out the Halloween sale, which is now on at 2000ad.com. We've got all our horror titles and a few more besides discounted quite heavily in time for Halloween next week. Also, MCM London at the Excel Centre is this weekend. Pop along to the Rebellion stand to play not just the demo for Zombie Army 4, but also to check out all the books and T-shirts we've got from 2000 AD. We shall see you there. Loads of stuff going on this month. Lots of big announcements. Keep your eyes peeled to the news blog at 2000ad.com and our social media to keep up on a couple of quite exciting announcements about next year. I shall say no more. And we're looking forward to the final show of the year, which is Thought Bubble in November. Now in the Harrogate Convention Centre, rather than good old Leeds. It's always a great way to round off a year of conventions. Come and see the frazzled droids and check out the art and script competitions as we select the droids of the future. And talking about events, if you're in London on Saturday the 23rd of November, make sure you head along to the Forbidden Planet Megastore on Shaftesbury Avenue, where Dave Kendall and Keck W will be signing copies of The Dark Judges Fall of Deadworld Volume 2 from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock. We had some advanced copies at the EGX Gaming Convention last weekend, and it went down very, very well. So make sure you put that in your diaries. Get yourself a signed copy. If you can't make it, get a copy anyway. It's an absolutely stunning series and great to see it collected up into a second volume. So, time to talk to Mark from No Yetis Allowed about the Crime Files, the new card-based game on mobile, based on everyone's favourite lawman, Judge Dredd. So it's wonderful to welcome Mark Hardisty from No Yetis Allowed. Welcome to the Thrillcast, Mark.
Hello there. Good to be here.
So tell us about Judge Dredd Crime Files.
Well, the game is, as in the title, you do play Judge Dredd. Before we start that, one of the things that we've been trying to do is really kind of get something that kind of comic fans would like. You know, we sort of taken it from the comic side, so the visuals are kind of comic based. You play Dredd, you bring justice to the streets of Mega City 1. It's kind of split into two parts. We have Crime Files, which is the story part of the game, where we have a number of kind of set pieces, set perps that you play through. Sort of these have been put together by kind of Dredd writers, and then you have the patrol section, which is more kind of standard life on the streets with generated encounters with different perps, which you have to sort of fight off to sort of gain experience points and gain more kind of credits. The game itself, it's kind of card based, so you get a deck of different equipment and attacks and moves, and as you sort of meet the perps, you have your cards in front of you, and you kind of play the cards onto the different perps, and these can be anywhere from a punch to a headbutt to a stub gun or law rod. We've even got like sort of Fist of Dread in there. So you kind of collect different cards, and there's a random element as you sort of play through and get these cards. So you never really know which cards you're going to kind of get rewarded for the sort of different crime files that you do. So that's kind of the game, really. That's what we're sort of putting together. It's on mobile.
Tell me about the genesis of this project, because, I've been involved in, hearing about it for a while now. But how long have you been working on this?
It was actually 2 years and 2 months ago, I reached out to Jason Kingsley and through LinkedIn, bizarrely, and just kind of, this is who we are. We're a small developer. We'd literally just done a Shrek game, Pocket Shrek, which was a mobile game. And, I sort of flagged, I'm personally a huge fan of Dredd. I've been reading it since the beginning. My older brother used to get 2000 AD. So I was sort of there as a impressionable 7-year-old. And, we were looking for the next game to do, and got on well with Jason. So it's literally been a couple of years in development, from sort of the early kind of just sorting out the license and the contract through to sort of about 1.5 years of actual development. So it takes that long to sort of put this together. I think, as I said at the beginning, I came at it as a fan, and I wanted to try to get over sort of how I saw Dredd from the comics. And so we were very adamant to kind of use Dredd creatives where possible. I didn't want this to come over as some kind of fan fiction type game. So kind of the artwork is all kind of artists, 2D artists that have kind of worked on Dredd. We've got kind of Chris Blythe and Len O'Grady doing all the colouring. We've got kind of Michael Carroll doing sort of the scripts and the storylines in the game, it has been that trying to keep the essence of Dredd in the game. It's the game as a fan that I've been most scared doing, with sort of sitting on the fan forums myself. I know how passionate we can be. So putting yourself out there with a game, as I said, it's the game I've been most shit scared doing, because of that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's literally, as we're sort of talking here, it's been out 1 day, and sort of the reaction's been kind of really positive. People seem to, are enjoying playing it, enjoying sort of getting into the boots of Dredd, and sort of punching some perps.
Tell me a bit about the gaming mechanism for this, because these kind of card-based mobile games are not something I'm particularly familiar with. If you're talking to somebody who's never played one before, how would you explain how that mechanism works?
Kind of each action, each weapon is sort of a card that you collect, like any sort of pack of cards. So, for example, you would, our most basic card that you start with is a punch. And that punch, you can play that onto a perp, and you get kind of first-person animation of Dredd punching that perp. We kind of went into it sort of not wanting something that was sort of playable by anybody. Like anybody, you don't have to be dexterous to play the game. You can sit and think about, okay, well, if I punch this perp here, that's going to take 1 move, and he's going to shoot me in 2 moves. So if I play a 1-move card onto him, I can do a 1-move dodge and dodge his shot. So there's a little bit of strategy as you sort of plan out how you deal the cards onto the perps. And each card that you get, each kind of move, as you play different patrols, you get more of those kind of duplicates of those cards back, which allows you to upgrade the kind of the cards you've got. So yeah, it's kind of, everybody's got like a move counter, which sort of says, I have a heavy blaster, which in 4 moves, I'm going to shoot you, Dredd, and that's going to do, 120 damage onto your armor and to your health. So you have to kind of counter that with I'm going to do a 3-move Fist of Dread and a 1-move dodge in case he's still alive when he actually shoots. And new cards and new weapons are unlocked as you play through the Crime File stories. You can go into the store and buy for Eagles, which is our kind of in-game currency, more cards. So you get kind of some of the cards that are not available through Crime Files become available through that way. We have about at the moment about 85 different cards in the game. And the plan is more are coming. Dredd's very much really set up well for this, because it's kind of, we have the Lawgiver Mark II, obviously, and within that we have a number of sort of card types for the different shots that he uses. So he has a plethora of attacks, which is quite nice.
One of the questions I was going to ask was how well the world of Dread, with all this rich detail, suits itself to making a game like this. Because obviously you've got so many different permutations and so many different characters. I imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's actually what you leave out.
It is overwhelming. Through development, when we're kind of coming up with, what characters should we include, what weapons should we include, there's so much. And a lot of the time it would be, me being asked, what characters we should put in. And I'll have a list of kind of 50 characters from, 40 plus years of history. And in some ways it was overwhelming because there is so much. We've kind of tried to set it in the here and now for Dredd's world. So it's as per the year that the comics are in. There are some characters. I mean, we sort of discussed having Hershey in the game, and we didn't put her in the game. We weren't aware that, spoiler, that she might pass away. So I remember the same conversation with Dirty Frank. He was going to be a card we were wanting to put in. And so, it's such a big world. It is overwhelming, but it's kind of, there's just so much that you can put in. And there's also kind of, with the 40 years, we have a law rod in the game, but we actually have 2 versions of the law rod, because we have a shotgun version and a rifle version, because that's changed so much over the sort of 40 years. The kind of the look and feel, because every artist has their own sort of take on certain elements. It was sometimes tricky to sort of nail, what exactly are exactly the shoulder pads like for Dredd, because there are so many iterations of that. What does the law rod look like, because there's so many sort of versions of those. So I would say it's great because there is so much there, but it's overwhelming, and it's kind of hats off to kind of the writers of Dredd, because it's such a well established but like massive world to sort of delve into. I kind of sort of experienced a little bit of sort of playing with toys in that world with the development of the game.
You've mentioned some of the talent involved, but also there's some 2000 AD artists that have been involved in creating some of these cards. You want to tell us about who they are and what the process of working with them has been like? Yeah.
Anything 2D, all the characters in the comic artwork, I would say everybody who we've used has some connection to 2000 AD or Dredd, even to the point, before I actually start on some of the Dredd artists, my lead artist, the head artist in the company, he's old school. He's old school development, and he worked on the Judge Dredd 95. I think it was the Mega Drive game, and he was there on the set of the 1995 Stallone movie. He never saw Stallone on set. But he sort of saw some interactions of Danny Cannon with some of the actors. So even from that, I've tried to keep it very Dredd. But for the actual, so it's 2D art. The enemy in the world of Mega City 1 is comic book So we initially used Neil Gouge to sort of set our initial look for kind of the characters. Neil's obviously he's like, he's done lots of strips of 2018, some Dredd stuff, but he had a very clean style, which we thought would work very well on mobile, and he was very kind of digitally proficient. So Neil kind of set the style, and from there, I'd sort of spoken to a lot of artists, some of them who, as a fan, I was kind of slightly in awe with. But we kind of used, we had Boo Cook doing a bunch of different characters in the game. He sort of set the style for one of our early stories is called the sort of Slab Dogs. It's a kind of punk gang, and he sort of set the style and look for those. And he did some kind of robots in one of the later stories. We also had Stephen Austin, who's kind of doing some of the covers for 2000 AD at the moment. Is sort of very sort of he's there online. He does a lot of sort of Dredd work. And we also had there's a guy called Stephen Baskerville, Baz, who's very old school. He used to kind of do colouring, back in the day for a lot of the strips. And he's somebody who I'd worked with quite a lot as well. He's kind of, I remember he'd done one of the breakout technical images for, I think it was like the Lawmaster bike back in one of the kind of early annuals. And he was great as he did a bit of colouring and a bit of character work as well. And we had like up and coming kind of Lyndon Webb did a couple of our Machismo units that are sort of later in the game. If you play for a number of hours, you will come across some Mechanismo units that some will help and some will maybe a hindrance to you. And that was on the characters. I sort of spoke, as I said before, I spoke with a number of artists. There was people like Colin McNeil, who was great. He sent some sketches through of the Mechanismo unit. And that was for the characters. On the backgrounds, we had Pi Par and Dan Cornwell doing all the backgrounds for us. And we've got there's about sort of 45, 50 different background pieces of artwork that were done. And Dan also did a bunch of special character cards for us as well. You might have seen on some of the images we've sort of put out, we've got kind of an Anderson and Judge Giant and Judge Rico. And there's a few other kind of characters that he sort of did. Len O'Grady coloured the majority of the characters, because it was always that balance between a number of different styles of play, but actually having kind of Len colouring everything, really kind of blended it all together. So it kind of allowed us to use these different artist looks. And Chris Blythe coloured all our backgrounds. He kind of the artwork that Dan did was coloured by Chris. So that was the artist. The characters themselves, it was quite technical putting them together because they're animated, so you had to build them with different joints and kind of separate our hands and separate our heads. So it was kind of, I think there were some artists who probably would have liked to have used, but probably didn't work kind of digitally and probably didn't want to kind of do the slightly more technical setup for some of the characters. So we had to kind of layer these in Photoshop when we were sort of producing them. So from an art point of view, they're kind of the people who were sort of working on the game. We also had kind of Ryan Brown doing the kind of the cover artwork for the game as well. It's great from my point of view because I got to talk to a lot of artists, people who I'd sort of been sort of following for years. There were lots of fan moments for me, sort of trying not to geek out too much at the end of a Skype call with people.
What's the challenges for writers who are normally used to writing in a fairly linear way, coming on to a game where there are so many multiple variations of what can happen?
And it's also the kind of the cost. It's very easy for a writer to describe a scene. I'm going to have an H-wagon crashing into a rooftop, and there's going to be a judge laying, half dead here. And we read that and just think, bloody hell, that's expensive to kind of create all the assets, put it all together, animate, get the effects. Whereas normally it's just like, an artist will sketch it in a panel. Structuring the content that kind of works with the sort of the game content that we have within the sort of the structure of the game. And then you have that kind of quirky Michael Carroll humor going on. But yeah, there were some bits that Michael sent. We did sort of think, whoa, we're going to have to tweak that a little bit because the scope of that sort of is too big for what we could actually do with the game. Because we are literally a small independent developer. We are a small group of people at a desk. So yeah. One
of the questions I did want to ask was why this kind of game? Why this kind of card-based, free to play with all these different elements coming in? Why did you decide that this was perfect for this project?
Well, we kind of went in. I was very much wanting something that was playable by a kind of a large section of people. It's kind of the fan base of Dredd is large and wide. But it does range from kind of younger through to older people, like myself. So I was trying to get a game that kind of could be played by anybody, and had a chance to kind of include a lot of the equipment into the game without, over the last couple of years, there's been, I sort of read the forums and people start talking about, hey, there's going to be a Dredd game. Cool. Oh, it's going to be Grand Theft Auto, driving around in Mega City 1 and, going to all these buildings. And it's just like, as somebody who's been in kind of games quite a long time, you just think, yeah, we haven't got 25 million to make that game. So it's not that what we did was cheap. But it was something that hopefully kind of gets across the world of Dredd, allows you to sort of explore it, allows you to sort of see the equipment, and it's kind of fun to play. But it's also kind of it's pick up and play. If you've got 5 minutes, you can sort of do a couple of perp encounters, or if you've got a couple of hours, you can sort of fight through a lot of the storyline. So yeah, so it's kind of I'm a big fan of Clash Royale at the moment. There's probably kind of some of that rubbed off on the game too.
I want to pick up on something you just kind of alluded to there, which is reaching out beyond the actual fandom. So, having a game that non-fans can play as well. How important was that in your thinking?
Yeah, very important. I mean, the core of this is kind of fans of Dredd. Being one myself and kind of creating something that is it's the comic book. More people probably know Dredd now from the kind of the movies and the comic book around the world. But for me, the comic book is kind of it's where Dredd is. It's great to produce something that has a chance to get more people into what you're into and what sort of affected you kind of through life. Getting more people into Dredd is going to be great. There's obviously a financial issue where we need as many people playing the game to actually allow us to A, pay for what we've done, and B, kind of continue adding more content and more stories into the game. So we released yesterday worldwide, so we've got people playing in countries around the world that we're sort of seeing. So it's bizarre thinking that there are people in Indonesia who are playing the game, whether they've read Dredd or not, I don't know. So it's kind of it's a bit of a strange position to be in, to be kind of somebody who's enjoyed something, but is part of the kind of mechanism to getting that out there a little bit as well around the world.
I mean, from talking about non-fans to the fans, tell me about some of the Easter eggs that you've got in there, some of the little references. I've already seen some people online kind of pick up on things that they recognise.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's obviously kind of the weaponry and the hardware that Dredd uses in there. I don't really want to go into too much detail for kind of some of the storylines we have, because we got some characters in there. I think in the reference, in the description, it's kind of, fight enemies old and new. We do have some kind of classic enemies in there, which I'm not going to talk about because it's kind of, it's kind of late in the game. So there's some characters there. But, it was little things like, I think, early on you kind of have a crime happening on the corner of a Wagner and a Square. And I think there's kind of references to a lot of the block names in there are kind of tipping our hat to various people. We've got kind of various artists referencing some of the blocks. I think we have kind of Judge McManus is a tech judge that you kind of meet early on. So it's kind of, it's trying to put it in without it being too sort of blatant, and without, if you get a reference, it's great. If you don't, it's kind of, it won't affect things. So, it's kind of, I guess we've created it with a kind of, we've created it as though the person playing it is a fan of Dredd, where, we don't explain what control is or what PSU is. We just go ahead and write it as though it was kind of sort of one of the weekly progs with the storyline.
Are there elements that you wish you could have included, but you weren't able to, whether for time or budget reasons?
There are elements and characters that are currently not in the game who, as long as it's semi-successful and people enjoy it, play it, watch adverts and download games from those adverts or buy some Eagles in the game, we'll still be looking to sort of put in for like later iterations. Early drafts, we had sort of Judge Death. It was going to be kind of in one of the early iterations, but he's been sort of pushed back to a later sort of phase of sort of the game. With development, when you get towards the end of a game, and everybody over a Rebellion would be the same. You often get, it's not the things that are in there, it's the things that you had to leave out for whatever reason, whether it's technical or budgetary. So there's a lot of bits. There's a lot of kind of design ideas that we sort of had to put by the wayside just because it was, it would suddenly become Grand Theft Auto, driving around a 3D city. But we'd have spent £10 million trying to sort of do that. There's some characters, but as long as things go okay, I'm looking to get more characters and more stuff into the game. It's kind of the whole, with what we've created, it's something that will develop over time, and sort of more stories and more sort of features. There's some social features that we're sort of bringing in where you can have sort of sector house clans of judges, where you'll be a judge in one of the sort of named sector houses, and you're kind of working together to sort of fight crime. So there's more stuff that's kind of coming that we might have missed in sort of this first iteration.
And I'm curious about the process of creating a game like this, because you say it's been over 2 years since you first contacted Jason Kingsley about this. These things take real time. I sometimes wonder that people don't necessarily understand the intense amount of work and time that goes into creating, any kind of game, never mind the kind of AAA style games that you see out there, but even something that seems as straightforward and, I hesitate to use this word, easy as a mobile game. We're all told, there's kids coding in their bedrooms and all this, that and the other. I think sometimes it creates an impression that you can just pull these things out of thin air.
Yeah, I mean, when you're dealing with kind of IP like Dredd, who we've licensed from Rebellion, there's a certain level of quality you have to hit to use those kind of characters, and it costs money, and it's I sort of deal with the finances of the company, and it's scary how much these things kind of cost. and even something like a small mobile game, it's still a lot of money. You know, it keeps me awake at night. How much these things kind of cost. You know, we are literally sort of, you know, 4 or 5 people sitting in a room making this, but we have outsourced to many kind of creatives and sort of people. You know, and it costs a lot of money. Oh yeah, I'm in a cold sweat now. That's what you've done to me.
Apologies for that.
That's okay.
But in terms of the kind of planning of it, so how much is finding the project developing as you go along, and how much is all in those early days of putting it together?
Yeah, I mean, you start with a concept document that's, you know, kind of a year and 3/4 ago, we sort of presented to Rebellion and said, this is kind of what we think we're doing with the game, and sort of signed off on that. And then it evolves and changes, and you have a kind of release date in mind, and you kind of try to break everything down into, okay, what needs to be done? Okay, we've got characters. Okay, what are the characters going to be? Okay, well, we're going to have to work out exactly how these characters are going to operate and move, and how they're split up, and what software we're going to use for that. Then we have to find the style for what they're going to look like. Then we have to actually create the various, you know, multitude of actual characters that are in the game. And all of this is planned out as early as possible. But, you know, things do change. When we kind of went into it, to be honest, we were still thinking, should the kind of character elements be 2D, 3D? You know, we have a 3D Dredd with kind of 2D comic artwork. We had to kind of prove that worked before kind of moving past that sort of gate in development. So you do your best at kind of trying to get an idea of what the game is, trying to break that down as accurately as possible, and trying to stick to that kind of schedule. But things change, you know, games evolve, and some things you suddenly see something on screen and you go, that's awesome, let's do more of that, and suddenly that changes the direction you're going. Yeah, so that's that. You know, it's I've been a producer in my life, and it's kind of spreadsheets and schedules are something that kind of, you know, I close my eyes at night and sort of see waterfall spreadsheet in front of my eyes, which is never good. But, yeah.
And just talking about yourself, what are the kind of favourite stories that you're bringing to this, or not necessarily ones that you've been able to incorporate into the game, but they're influencing you in the way that you've approached the game and the things that you're looking for? Yeah,
I mean, we have a feature which are the patrols, which was very much meant to be a kind of life on the street, which is just this kind of the onslaught of Mega City 1, and that was something that's always been there. We always wanted that kind of, you can jump in onto the street and just get this continual sort of, you know, continual perp after perp after encounter after encounter. And it was from the night yard shift back in the day, and I, you know, not wanting to name drop, when I met with John Wagner and we were discussing the game, and I was explaining this, he said, "Oh, have you read Graveyard Shift? And I said, yes, that's exactly what this is. This is exactly what that's meant to be." And so there's that element of that kind of, you know, it's a day on the life of a judge. As for the stories, one of the things I've tried to do is leave that to the writers. We had loads of, you know, as designers and artists and coders, we would say, hey, we could have werewolves, hey, we could have muties, hey, we could have this and that. And it was very much kind of, when we spoke with the writers, it was like, can you produce us a story? What's it about? Well, we don't really want to say, we want you to come with that, because we didn't want, you know, I have all these kind of stories that, you know, over the last 40 years, I think, hey, wouldn't it be great if Dredd time travel back in the past and made him say, hey, wouldn't it be great? It's all crappy fan fiction stuff. But I just wanted it to be coming from people who write Dredd. I didn't want to have that influence myself because I'm a reader of those stories, not a kind of creator of those stories. It comes with the artwork. We wanted it to be from the creatives of Dredd rather than from ourselves. And I don't know if that's putting ourselves down a bit, but that's kind of something I've been pretty adamant going through is trying to make it so it's as little fan fiction as possible. Sort of trying to get it from the source wherever possible.
I mean, you've mentioned about the kind of games that people want and the challenges of ever providing those. But I guess my question is, are you pleased with how it turned out?
Yeah. Oh God, yes. Yeah. I mean, as any game developer will say, when you play your own game, you always see the things that aren't in the game, and you always see the bugs, and you always think, oh, we were going to do this. But a couple of days ago, we opened up some of the early design documents, like the concept docs that we had, and it's just so much better than what we originally envisaged it was going to be. It's and again, sort of hopefully seeing the feedback that we've had, with only being out for 24 hours, people seem to be, the fans seem to be enjoying it. And there was a friend of mine who's a game designer who was also like a fan of Dredd. I think one of his comments was, "It feels like Dredd," and that for me, that was like, well, that's kind of what we set out to do, something that sort of felt like Dredd and had that kind of had that essence.
Excellent. Do you want to tell people where they can find Judge Dredd Crime Files?
Yeah, if you look on Google Play or the Apple App Store, and literally type in Judge Dredd Crime Files, you will see the game. It's free to play, so you can download it. Obviously, it'd be great if you bought some Eagles, and if you do watch any adverts, if you download any games from those adverts, we get money for that. So it all helps. It all helps keep us going and keep us adding more into the game.
Fantastic. Well, when we're recording this, it's been 24 hours since the game launched, and I already know people who have sunk numerous hours into playing away. So you must be doing something right. But thanks very much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat.
Thanks, Michael. It's been good.
And thanks to Mark for chatting so much about the development of the game. As I said, I've seen quite a few people spend their evening gaming away on the Crime Files. So make sure you download it. As Mark said, please do support it if you can with video clicks and video watches and downloading other games and everything, because it all helps to make the game a success and means that No Yetis Allowed can continue to support it and introduce cool new features like, maybe Judge Death in the future. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time when we'll be preparing for Thought Bubble. But until then, Splundig Verthrig Earthlets.
Alert, alert, alert. Fill power levels dangerously high. Alert, alert. Read 2000 AD every week. Ask your comic book store or newsagent now. Subscribe to the galaxy's greatest comic at 2000ADonline.com. Subscribe digitally on our apps for Apple, Android, and Windows 10. And download DRM free copies from 2000ADonline.com. Alert, alert. Stand by for urgent updates. Search for 2000 AD on Twitter and Facebook. Watch the latest videos at youtube.com/2000 AD online. And follow on Instagram at Insta2000 AD. Program complete. Shutting down.